And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and this time it is the first proper instalment of my series about watching the MCU in 22 days and what my thoughts are. So with no further ado, let's jump straight into it. Today I have just finished watching Iron Man on DVD. First thing I'll point out is that the DVD home screen, the menu screen, looks so dated. Oh my god, it looks so much older than you would expect from a DVD release in 2008. It's actually quite funny. Anyway, I watched the movie. I really enjoyed the movie, as I suspected I would. I've only seen it once back in 2008, and so watching it again now, great feel. I'll just run through things that I thought about them. So to start with, the introduction scene, it starts off straight in Afghanistan. It starts off straight away with Tony Stark, just being Tony Stark, being a baller as you can imagine, in the back of a Humvee, super cool, getting abducted, getting blown up by one of his own munitions, and then it cuts to 36 hours earlier. It is a great way to open a story. It is a great way to open what ended up being a fantastic franchise. And the focus on Tony and the focus on the impact of his own hubris and everything going along with it. Brilliant characterization, brilliant setting. I didn't realise at the time, because I guess in 2008 you have no idea all the movies that are going to come. But looking at it now, it's like that is a fantastic way to have started the franchise. So loved it. Then there's all the stuff that we know. Great performance by Robert Downey Jr. Great setup. Great escape from the cave in Afghanistan where he's trapped. I almost forgot about Dr. Yinsen, the guy who dies to buy him some time and to let Tony power up the Mark I armor and escape. In the comics, Dr. Yinsen's a big thing. In the movies, he's mentioned once, and I kind of felt a little bit actually watching that it's a shame or a little bit odd that he's not mentioned more often in at least the later Iron Man films, if not the later Iron Man performances. Maybe he is and I just didn't notice it, but I just felt like actually in the comics the death of Dr. Yinsen seemed to resonate a bit more with Tony than it feels like it did in this franchise. But hey, we'll talk about it in later movies, I guess. Another thing I want to point out is the first press conference when Tony gets back. That was fantastic. I don't remember that. I don't even mean I don't remember that being that good. I genuinely don't even remember the press conference, but it was great. The dialogue was great. The performance was great. Something a lot of people don't realise is that was actually an ad-libbed scene. Robert Downey Jr. just ad-libbed not only a lot of the dialogue, but also the way it was performed. So it was his idea to be like, oh, can everyone just sit on the floor and we can all be at the same level while we talk? So great scene, massively underrated, and it's odd that no one really mentions that as one of the great speeches of Iron Man, or the one great bits of dialogue in the MCU. Soon after that is the scene where Tony kind of loses it and heads back to Afghanistan to actually fight a lot of rebels and insurgents who are using his weapons. And that scene is done really well because there's no dialogue in it. It's just Tony watching the news broadcast and getting angrier and angrier, and then lashing out, and then suiting up, and then flying off. And then when he gets to Afghanistan, when he starts taking out these insurgents, he doesn't say anything. Like, he literally doesn't say anything. He takes out loads of people, kills, I imagine, a whole bunch of people. And he literally only says 3 words at one point to one person. And there's no sort of snappy zinger, there's no sort of cool John Wayne style comeback. It's just silent, profound. It's actually quite intense and is astonishingly good, really. Speaking of the insurgents, I loved the portrayal of the character Raza by Farhan Tahir, and I kind of forgot that he was in this movie, and I kind of forgot the performance of this particular villain as the head of the Ten Rings who abducts Tony. And I can realise why, because he gets killed by Obadiah Stane, and I was kind of gutted by that actually watching it this time around. I was like, this is a great actor doing a great performance of a great villain. Maybe if they'd had more of a long-term perspective of the MCU going in on the first film, they would have kept him. I just think it's a shame that he died, but fair enough, that's what happens. Subsequently, there's a couple of scenes later on which are also fascinating insights into Tony's mindset. Is when he's talking to Pepper and he's saying, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to carry on doing the next mission and the next mission. There's no more partying, there's no more just going around making weapons and being a playboy. It's now about the mission. It's a really interesting insight into the survivor's guilt which is starting to plague Tony. And I guess I only really noticed it in this, because this is a theme that plays out in a lot of the rest of the MCU and the subsequent Iron Man movies, and then especially after the events of Avengers, where Tony has this constant set of post-traumatic survivor's guilt. But the fact that it's hinted at, and in fact alluded to quite clearly in the first movie, really impressive. The rest of the film is solid good performances. It's always awesome watching him do the whole suit-up scenes and building the Iron Man armour. The final battle with Warmonger I thought was great. Jeff Bridges, brilliant actor. I'd love to see what he's doing in further MCU things if they ever do bring him back. The one thing I'd say is the very final part of the takedown is really disappointing. Like the fight and the battle, great. The whole bit about going into the stratosphere and icing up, very clever. But then at the end, Marvel kind of default back to something that they used to do back in the early 2000s a lot, which was a case of big machine, bright light, big evil cloud in the sky. It was just a bit daft. It was like it wasn't a very satisfying ending of having this arc reactor overload and suddenly wipes out Obadiah and Warmonger. But the rest of the battle was great. Well choreographed, well put together, and the CGI holds up. Speaking of other stuff that was great, believe it or not, Gwyneth Paltrow. I am aware that a lot of people have a lot of problems with her, and I'm not a massive fan. But I went into this thinking, oh, Gwyneth Paltrow in 2008, I bet she faxed in some terrible performance. Actually, it's totally plausible. Her characterization of Pepper Potts is absolutely great. The interaction with Tony is great. The very understated kind of sexuality to their interaction is perfect because there's no sexual tension per se, but there is an awareness of there's the potential for that, and it was just done really well. So I liked that. And that took us right to the end where Tony Stark says he is Iron Man. It cuts to credits. And it was great. Oh, and in terms of the soundtrack, I mean, if you listen to the credits, the opening riff of the Iron Man soundtrack is actually really, really good. I know the soundtrack tends to get overwhelmed now when you talk about Marvel soundtracks because the Endgame and the Avengers soundtrack is so good. But the original Iron Man soundtrack, the opening riffs to that guitar, excellent stuff. It's actually done by Ramin Djawadi, who's the same guy that does the soundtrack to Pacific Rim. And the only reason I know that is because I googled it afterwards, because I was like, this sounds a lot like Pacific Rim, which is an amazing soundtrack. And it's the same guy, and it is really, really good. So those are my thoughts. Great movie. Lots of stuff in there I'd forgotten and just hadn't retained at all, which was really clever. A lot of stuff which is clever foreshadowing for future things that are going to happen later in the MCU. And a lot of stuff that, had they done it slightly differently, or had they had a longer game plan from the get-go, they might have done slightly differently. I think my only question is, it would have been great to have seen Jeff Bridges again. He did a great turn as Obadiah Stane, and it'd be cool to see some kind of Marvel spin-off movie just off the villains. And I'm sure this is something you're going to hear me talk about repeatedly as we talk about the Abomination, Whiplash, and a whole variety of sort of Marvel villains who just kind of like fall to the wayside after every single movie. It would be great to put all these people together. Can you imagine that? Led by the Vulture and so on. But yeah, I thought Jeff Bridges was great as Obadiah Stane. I thought it was great as Warmonger. I thought the movie was really solid. It holds up really well. It's a great introduction to the MCU, and I am looking forward to tomorrow, which is going to be The Incredible Hulk. And that's it today, guys. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you're following along and watching at home. Let me know how you're doing with the lockdown. Are you on the lockdown as well? And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and picking up my novel No Gods or Kings. It's free or less than $1 depending on what Amazon memberships you have. And as always, guys, until tomorrow, until we're watching The Incredible Hulk, stay classy.